Hello and welcome. Today, we are diving into a whole range of different viewpoints, everything from a massive power shift in the global oil market to the hidden costs that are making your next car, well, pretty much unaffordable. So let's get right into it. Welcome to the Lenny and Maria Sanchez podcast and video show. We're so glad you could join us today as we unpack these topics.
All right, so here's what we've got on the docket for you today. We're going to kick things off with a major change in the global oil game, then jump into why new cars cost so much. After that, we'll look at a report on media narratives in Gaza, followed by a pretty challenging reevaluation of Winston Churchill. Then we'll explore an argument against contraception, and we'll wrap it all up with a quick roundup of headlines from the week.
Okay, first up, we're looking at a piece from the Expos, and it argues that the world's oil refining industry is going through a massive, fundamental change, one that has some really huge geopolitical consequences.
You know, the article really frames its entire argument around this famous line attributed to Henry Kissinger. The whole idea here is that the power to turn crude oil into useful stuff. You know, gasoline, sure, but also the raw materials for over 6,000 other products. That power is a critical tool for global influence.
So what exactly is this shift we're talking about? Well, the article highlights this really stark contrast. Over in the West, refining capacity is actually shrinking, but in the East, it's booming. We're talking China, India, and the Middle East leading the charge. This isn't just a small adjustment. The source says it signals a massive transfer of industrial power and really control over the entire global energy supply chain.
And why is this happening in the US? Well, the article points to a combination of things: tough environmental rules, a lot of political pushback, and the simple fact that it costs a fortune to upgrade these old facilities. In fact, get this, no new major refineries have been built in decades, and you're seeing more and more closures, like those planned out in California. And the sheer scale of this shift is just staggering. By 2030, we're looking at 181 new refineries planned to come online. But according to the Expos, the really crucial part is where they're being built. The vast majority are in Asia and the Middle East, which pretty much positions them to dominate the future of energy production.
All right, let's switch gears, literally. We're moving on to the auto industry. An article from LewRockwell.com is asking a question that I think a lot of us are wondering about. Why on earth has the price of a new car just gone through the roof? The piece makes the case that we're basically hitting a wall financially. With prices this high, car loans are getting stretched out to 7 years, and that's just not sustainable. Now, the author suggests a key reason for these prices isn't just inflation. It's something they call compliance costs.
So, what are these compliance costs? Well, the article is talking about all the features that are now mandated by federal law. And when you see the numbers they lay out, it's pretty eye-opening. They estimate that things like multiple airbags can add $3,500 to the price. That backup camera? $500. And these are costs that are passed directly to you, the consumer, but you never see them broken down on the sticker.
And the end result of these sky-high prices is what the author calls a dangerous loan trap. To even afford a new car, people are signing up for these 7-year loans. The problem? Around year 4 or 5, the car's value can actually drop below what you still owe. You're underwater. And the article says people might just be forced to walk away from the loan.
Okay, we're going to turn now to a very different and obviously very sensitive topic. Our next source comes from the UNS Review. It's an analysis from an author named Jonathan Cook about media narratives surrounding the conflict in Gaza. As always, we're just going to present the claims from the article as they are reported in the source.
The whole article is centered around something it calls the legitimization cell. The author, citing what they say are Israeli intelligence sources, defines this as a special unit that was created to plant stories in Western media. According to the report, its purpose is to make military actions seem legitimate while discrediting journalists and other victims by trying to link them to Hamas.
The author then goes on to outline a 3-step process that's attributed to this cell. Step 1, they claim, is to create links, even if they're fabricated, between Palestinian journalists and Hamas. Step 2 is to get these stories into Western media outlets, to create doubt and justify actions taken against the press. The ultimate goal, as described in the article, is to manage how the public in the West sees the conflict, which in turn reduces political pressure and lets military operations go on for longer.
Staying with the UNS Review, our next piece takes a critical look at one of the most famous figures in modern history, Winston Churchill, and specifically his leadership during World War II. This is the Churchill we all recognize, right? The defiant leader, the bulldog, the ultimate symbol of British resolve against impossible odds.
His speeches are legendary, and they really define that whole era of heroism. But this particular article asks us to look past that iconic image for a moment.
The source presents a completely different view of what the war's outcome meant for Britain. Instead of just focusing on the victory, it lists what it calls catastrophic results: the end of the British Empire, a national debt so massive it was crippling, the rise of the Soviet Union across Eastern Europe, and what the author calls a socialist straitjacket at home that held the economy back for decades.
And here is the article's most explosive claim. It all centers on that pivotal moment in 1940 when Churchill decided to keep fighting. The source contends that right then, at that exact time, Churchill was financially ruined, and he was bailed out by a man named Sir Henry Strakosch, a very wealthy financier who was also a fierce opponent of Hitler. The piece suggests his financial tie created a potential conflict of interest that may have influenced the decision to fight on.
All right, our fifth topic today, also from LouRockwell.com, makes a historical and a moral case against contraception, arguing that it should be criminalized.
The article starts by pointing out just how fast society's views on this changed. It's hard to believe, but just over 100 years ago, in 1920, the Anglican Communion issued a really strong condemnation of contraception. Just 10 years later, though, they reversed that. Then you had the FDA approving the pill in 1960, followed by 2 huge Supreme Court cases that legalized birth control for everyone. It was a massive shift in a really short amount of time.
To make its central point, the article uses this quote from C.S. Lewis. The author tries to frame contraception not as a simple matter of personal choice, but as a kind of power that the living have over future generations, the power to deny them existence in the first place. This is presented as the core moral objection.
And for our last segment, we're going to do a real quick fire round of headlines from the newsletter Coffee and COVID. It's just a snapshot of the stories that have been making waves in their particular corner of the news world this past week.
Okay, so here's a quick look at the headlines from their weekly digest. As you can see, the stories cover a lot of ground, from big changes at the CDC and HHS to calls for new investigations and some major foundations cutting ties with political funding groups. I'll just give you a moment to scan those. And that brings us to the end of our roundup today. Whew! We have covered a lot, from global economics and historical takes to domestic policy. It really just leaves us with one final question to think about. What is the value of considering these kinds of alternative narratives? Thank you for listening to another session of the Lenny and Maria Sanchez podcast and video show, produced and archived at the website notebooklmvideos.com. We'll see you next time.